Littleton, Colorado, seemed to embody the American dream. Well-maintained homes, manicured lawns, friendly neighbors, and a sense of tranquility that appeared to permeate every corner of this small town. One of Littleton's most prominent residents was Richard Engelbert, a successful 48-year-old realtor whose life seemed as impeccable as the town he lived in. Richard was well known in his community. His professional reputation was spotless. He represented wealthy clients, helping them buy and sell luxury real estate. His name frequently appeared in local newspapers, where he was praised for his participation in charitable events and support of local schools. He was the type of person you'd encounter at town fairs or charity events, invariably wearing a smile and having a kind word for everyone. His financial status also inspired envy. Richard owned a large house in an upscale neighborhood, which he had personally selected. The four-bedroom home with a pool and mountain views often became the object of neighbors' admiration. The Engelbert family seemed to be the embodiment of success and stability. Richard's wife, Wendy, a 45-year-old homemaker, was his complete opposite. While Richard loved being in the spotlight, Wendy preferred to stay in the background. She took care of the house and led a quiet, unassuming life, focusing on maintaining order in their home and raising her son from her first marriage, Harrison. Harrison was an 18-year-old teenager who, like many his peers, was going through a complex period of personal development. A tall, lean young man with slightly tousled blonde hair, he was a typical teenager trying to find his place in the world. Harrison dreamed of going to college, but hadn't yet decided what he wanted to do in life. He rarely conflicted with his stepfather, and neighbors often saw them together doing various chores, taking out the trash, washing the car, or just chatting in the backyard. From the outside, this family appeared to live in harmony. Wendy often organized barbecues where neighbors were invited, and Richard enjoyed manning the grill. Harrison usually kept to himself but smiled and was polite to guests. None of those who visited their home could have suspected that dark secrets lurked behind this idyllic picture. But Richard Engelbert's life was far from the ideal it appeared to be. None of his close friends and family suspected what lay behind his friendly smile and confident manners. A 2-year relationship with his stepson had been carefully hidden from everyone. For Harrison, this relationship began when he was still a minor, but its dynamics remained complex and incomprehensible to outside observers. It was unclear where the line between manipulation and consent lay, but one thing was certain. This relationship had become a dark secret capable of destroying their lives. Moreover, Richard found time for secret meetings with other men. Using his status as a realtor, he arranged meetings in vacant houses he showed to clients. These temporarily empty homes became the sites of his hidden encounters. He never left any traces and meticulously planned every detail. None of his colleagues, clients, or family suspected his double life. Wendy may have sensed something, but preferred not to delve into details. She rarely asked questions about her husband's late returns or why he sometimes looked tired and irritable. Harrison, on the other hand, lived with constant feelings of guilt and depression. However, neither of them attempted to disrupt the usual order of things. At first glance, the Engelberts' life was perfect, but this perfect life was merely a fragile mask hiding dark secrets that would eventually surface. When tragedy finally struck, it shook all of Littleton and destroyed everything that had seemed so solid. August 16, 2023 began for Wendy Engelbert like any other ordinary day. She woke up early, prepared breakfast for herself and Harrison, and then went about her daily routine. Richard, she assumed, was at work, but strangely, he hadn't left any note or reminder about his meetings, which was highly unusual for him. By evening, his absence had become worrying. Wendy tried calling her husband, but his phone was turned off. This increased her anxiety even more. She thought Richard might have stayed overnight at one of his properties, but he usually always informed her of such schedule changes. At first, she decided not to panic, but with each passing minute, her worry grew. Harrison also looked concerned, but tried not to show his emotions. Around 9 o'clock in the evening, Wendy, unable to wait any longer, decided to search the house. She looked for any signs that might explain her husband's disappearance. Starting with the kitchen and bedroom, she noticed that his briefcase and car keys were in their usual place. This meant he had probably never left the house. Wendy headed to the basement to check if Richard was doing repairs or cleaning, one of his hobbies. Opening the basement door, Wendy noticed a strange smell. It was sharp, metallic, with a hint of something else she couldn't quite identify. Turning on the light, she slowly descended. There, in the far corner, she discovered her husband's body. Richard lay on the floor, his eyes open but lifeless. Blood covered his shirt and dripped onto the concrete floor. In shock, Wendy couldn't move from the spot. Her breathing quickened, and she felt her legs giving way. Gathering her strength, she ran upstairs and called 911. Police arrived at the scene 15 minutes after the call. Detective James Cattle, an experienced investigator with more than 20 years of experience, was assigned to lead the case. He knew that every minute at a crime scene mattered. The basement was quickly cordoned off, and forensics began their work. At first inspection, it was obvious that Richard's death was violent. Multiple wounds were found on his chest and neck. The angle of the body's fall and the blood distribution indicated he was killed right there. No signs of forced entry or struggle were found, which immediately led investigators to consider that someone who knew Richard personally might be involved. Important evidence was also found at the scene. A knife lying several feet from the body and faint footprints leading to the stairs. The murder weapon was covered in blood, and fingerprints were likely present on its handle. However, neither paper documents nor Richard's phone were found in the basement. Wendy was in a state of deep shock. She was questioned that same evening. At first, she couldn't speak coherently, but soon the detective managed to calm her down. She said she hadn't heard any suspicious sounds and hadn't noticed anything unusual in Richard's behavior in recent days. When the detective asked about possible enemies her husband might have had, she shook her head no. Richard, according to her, was a kind and respected person. She couldn't imagine who would want to harm him. However, Wendy admitted that their family life wasn't perfect. In recent months, Richard had become more withdrawn, but she attributed this to work-related stress. News of Richard's death spread quickly through Littleton. His colleagues, neighbors, and friends were shocked. No one could believe something like this could happen to him. The next day, a group of local residents gathered outside the Engelberts' house. They brought flowers and candles to honor the memory of a man they knew as a successful professional and kind neighbor. However, beyond this support, rumors began to circulate in the community. Some people suggested that Richard's death might be connected to his work. Others wondered if this was a simple break-in gone wrong, or if someone close to him was involved in the murder. Detective Cattle understood he had a long road ahead. The crime scene indicated that the killer was familiar with the victim, and the absence of forced entry strengthened this suspicion. But the main question remained: who wanted to kill Richard Engelbert and why? The day after Richard Engelbert's body was discovered, Detective James Cattle began the active phase of the investigation. An experienced investigator with an impeccable reputation, he understood that every detail mattered. He started by examining the crime scene and interviewing Richard's closest associates, hoping to find clues that would lead him to the killer. The forensics team completed collecting evidence in the basement. Analysis of the knife, the presumed murder weapon, confirmed that there were fingerprints on the handle. However, exact matching with any of the house's residents would take time. Footprints were also found in the basement, but they were blurred by blood, making it difficult to determine the exact size and type of shoe. The absence of Richard's phone drew particular attention. This seemed strange, considering all his other belongings, keys, briefcase, wallet, remained in place. The detective suspected that the killer might have deliberately taken the phone to hide something important. A request was submitted for phone records that could indicate who the victim had communicated with before his death. Wendy, Richard's wife, was the first suspect. This was standard procedure in such cases. Detective Cattle met with her in her living room, trying to create an atmosphere that would allow her to relax and speak frankly. Wendy repeated her version of events. She hadn't heard or seen anything on the night of the murder. She added that Richard had seemed tired and nervous lately, but she hadn't given it much thought. assuming it was work-related. When asked if there were conflicts in their marriage, she admitted that in recent months, relations had become more strained. Richard was staying late at work more often, and their communication had been reduced to rare conversations about household matters. Cattle noticed that Wendy was nervous, but this was natural in her situation. He had no direct evidence to suspect her involvement in the murder, but he decided to keep her under observation. Police obtained data on the movement of funds in Richard's bank accounts. A week before his death, he had withdrawn a large sum in cash, $10,000. This money was never found, and none of his close associates knew about its intended use. This made investigators suspect that Richard might have been involved in some illegal or dangerous activity. The first results of the phone analysis also became known. Richard's last call was to an unknown number registered to a Clifton Jones. Investigation of the number showed it belonged to a burner phone purchased with cash in a neighboring town. This fact complicated the identification of the caller, but raised serious suspicions. Detectives began digging deeper into Richard's personal life than he could have anticipated while alive. Conversations with his colleagues revealed unexpected details. Several employees mentioned that Richard sometimes disappeared during the workday, citing urgent matters. His assistant also revealed that in recent months, Richard had begun avoiding major clients and more frequently scheduled meetings in houses he was showing. These testimonies coincided with surveillance camera footage found at one of the properties, where Richard was seen with an unknown man. Although their meeting didn't look suspicious, it led investigators to think he might have been leading a double life. Records were also found on Richard's computer indicating he visited dating sites for men. This discovery became a turning point in the investigation, as it suggested a possible motive for the crime related to his personal relationships. Wendy's son, Harrison, was the second person interrogated. The young man appeared depressed and avoided direct eye contact with the detective. Harrison claimed he knew nothing about what had happened to his stepfather and was in his room listening to music on the night of the murder. However, several facts alarmed the detective. First, Harrison, according to neighbors, often had conflicts with Richard. Some claimed the teenager had repeatedly expressed dissatisfaction with his stepfather, accusing him of interfering too much in his personal life. Second, analysis of the footprints found in the basement showed they could belong to someone with a shoe size matching Harrison's. But decisive importance lay not in suspicions, but in evidence. Detective Cattle decided to continue surveillance of Harrison to gather additional data. After several days of investigation, it became clear that Richard's murder was not random. No signs of break-in or robbery were found, and the fact of his secret life opened up a whole range of new theories. Detective Cattle faced a difficult task. He had to figure out who exactly from Richard's circle could have resorted to murder. At this stage, the key figures remained Wendy, Harrison, and the unknown person Richard had communicated with before his death. The investigation was preparing for the next phase, searching for additional evidence that could link one of the suspects to the murder. The investigation into Richard Engelbert's murder entered a more intense phase. Each day, police found more evidence, but the number of questions grew alongside it. Detective James Cattle decided to focus his attention on the key figures who, in his opinion, could be involved in the crime. Wendy remained one of the main suspects. Her motive could have been related to family disagreements or financial issues, especially considering the large sum of money Richard had withdrawn before his death. However, there was no direct evidence of her involvement. During a repeat interrogation, Wendy admitted she knew about some aspects of her husband's double life. She revealed that several months before the murder, she had accidentally discovered correspondence with men on his laptop. Wendy didn't make a scene, but their relationship had cooled since that moment. She claimed she never discussed this with Richard, fearing it would destroy the family. The detective asked if she knew about the money Richard had withdrawn. Wendy responded that she knew nothing about it and hadn't seen her husband bringing large sums home. Her answers sounded convincing, but some details raised doubts in the detective's mind. Harrison Engelbert became another central figure in the investigation. The young man continued to claim he was in his room on the night of the murder. However, analysis of his phone showed that evening he was not only not listening to music as claimed, but actively using his device. sending messages, and browsing social media. Moreover, police discovered that several days before the murder, Harrison had searched the internet for information about fatal injuries and self-defense. When asked why he did this, he answered it was just curiosity sparked by watching a crime series. However, these searches strengthened suspicions against him. Additional evidence also began to paint a picture. Forensics established that the footprints found in the basement could indeed belong to Harrison. Furthermore, fingerprint analysis on the knife showed they matched his biometric data. One unexpected suspect was Alexa Hernandez, a woman whose marriage, according to some witnesses, had been destroyed due to Richard's interference. Alexa's friends reported that her husband had left her after beginning to work closely with Richard in business. These relationships, in their opinion, had an intimate nature. The divorce not only damaged her reputation but also left her without means of support. Alexa denied involvement in the murder. At the time of the crime, she was at home, which her neighbors confirmed. However, detectives didn't exclude her from the list of suspects, as her revenge motive was obvious. One of the key pieces of evidence was the discovery of Richard's phone. It was found in a trash container near his house. The device contained numerous messages from an unknown number that had previously appeared in the investigation. The correspondence indicated personal relationships between Richard and this person. Detectives began tracking who might be behind this number. Additionally, surveillance footage from a camera on a house opposite the Engelberts was examined. The recording captured a figure leaving the house several minutes after Richard's presumed time of death. The figure was male, of medium height, but identifying the face was impossible due to the low quality of the recording. Cattle began analyzing connections between all three suspects, Wendy, Harrison, and Alexa. At this stage, he decided to use psychological pressure on each of them to reveal contradictions in their versions. Additional interrogations were organized with profiling specialists. During one such interrogation, Harrison showed nervousness that didn't escape the investigators' attention. He began contradicting himself in his testimony about the night of the murder. Specifically, he first claimed he hadn't gone down to the basement, then admitted he might have looked in there for a few seconds to find a screwdriver. Continuing to examine Richard's personal life, detectives stumbled upon another important detail. One of his colleagues reported that Richard regularly visited the same house, although it had been empty for several months. When searching this property, police found a hidden camera that could become a key link in the investigation. The camera recordings showed Richard's meetings with various men, including the unknown person he had communicated with on the day of the murder. These video materials strengthened suspicions that the crime's motive could be connected to his intimate life. Detective Cattle understood that the case was becoming increasingly complicated. Ahead lay the main discovery that would ultimately change the course of the investigation. The investigation of Richard Engelbert's murder was moving toward a decisive moment. New evidence and unexpected details discovered by investigators began connecting the chain of events. The major breakthrough came with the discovery of a hidden camera in one of the properties Richard frequently used for his secret meetings. The house Richard used for meetings had been empty for several months, but his visits were registered in security system records. During a thorough search, police discovered a camera installed in the corner of one room. At first glance, it was unnoticeable. Built into a ventilation opening, it remained hidden from view. Detective Cattle sent the device for examination to extract and analyze its contents. The results were stunning. The camera recorded everything that happened in the room, including Richard's meetings with various people. Among them was the unknown man whose number appeared in Richard's last calls. However, the most important finding was that the recording included the moment preceding the murder. The camera footage captured Harrison's visit to the house the day before the murder. The frames showed him entering the room, nervously looking around, then hiding something in the closet. However, the most shocking was the second video segment, recorded on the night of the murder. The recording showed Richard and Harrison entering the basement. An intense argument broke out between them, which quickly escalated into physical confrontation. There was no sound on the video recording as the camera only captured images, but one thing was clear. It was Harrison who delivered the fatal knife wounds. After this, he stayed in the basement for several minutes, then left holding Richard's phone. This became the main proof of his involvement. With this evidence in hand, police detained Harrison. During interrogation, he first tried to deny his guilt, claiming the recordings were fake, but under the pressure of irrefutable evidence, he broke down. Harrison confessed that the murder was provoked by personal trauma and emotional tension that had been building over the past 2 years. He revealed that Richard had manipulated him since his teenage years, forcing him to participate in their relationship under threat of exposure to his mother. That night, when the tragedy occurred, Harrison went to the basement to demand Richard end their relationship and leave him alone. However, their conversation escalated into an argument, and Harrison claimed he acted in a fit of rage. Nevertheless, detectives qualified his actions as premeditated, as the recordings showed Harrison had brought the knife to the basement beforehand. Harrison's confession shocked Wendy and the entire Littleton community. Richard's secret life and Harrison's severe emotional state revealed dark aspects of their family life that had previously been hidden behind a facade of prosperity. Neighbors and acquaintances who had recently admired the Engelberts now looked at this family with condemnation and pity. However, for Detective Cattle, this was an important conclusion to a complex phase of the investigation. All evidence now formed a complete picture, and the motive and circumstances of the murder became clear. Ahead lay the trial process, which would officially establish Harrison's guilt and determine his sentence. The trial of Harrison Engelbert began 6 months after his arrest. This case caused enormous public resonance in Littleton and beyond. Reports about the tragedy, hidden secrets, and horrific events in the Engelberts' basement dominated local news. Harrison was charged with second-degree murder, and at trial, both prosecution and defense prepared to fight for their vision of justice. The prosecution, represented by the district attorney, based its case on compelling evidence. Video footage from the crime scene, analysis of evidence, and Harrison's confession. The prosecutor emphasized that Harrison's actions were premeditated. He reminded the court that Harrison brought the knife to the basement beforehand, and his internet searches days before the murder confirmed he planned the attack. On the video presented by the prosecution, it was clearly visible how Harrison delivered fatal blows to his stepfather. The prosecutor also pointed to his actions after the murder, including attempts to hide Richard's phone, which indicated a desire to cover his tracks. According to the prosecution, Harrison acted coldly and deliberately. Harrison's attorneys presented the case in an entirely different light. They argued that their client acted not from premeditation but under the influence of severe emotional stress. They presented evidence that Richard had manipulated and exploited Harrison for several years, beginning in his adolescence. This, according to the defense, led to an emotional collapse that provoked the tragedy. Witnesses from among Harrison's friends and close ones testified at trial, describing him as a quiet and withdrawn teenager. Psychological experts invited by the defense testified about the post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, Harrison suffered from. They argued that the murder occurred during an affect caused by years of pressure and threats from Richard. One of the most anticipated moments of the trial was Wendy's testimony. Her statements became the emotional culmination of the proceedings. She described how she gradually began noticing changes in Harrison's behavior but couldn't understand their cause. Learning during the investigation about Richard's secret life and his manipulation, she was devastated and stated she would never have allowed her son to endure such horror. However, Wendy also admitted that Richard's murder was a heavy blow for her. She said, "Despite everything I've learned, I cannot justify what Harrison did, but I hope the court will consider what he had to go through." After 3 weeks of proceedings and 5 days of deliberations, the jury reached a verdict. Harrison Engelbert was found guilty of second-degree murder. In sentencing, the judge considered the evidence presented by the defense about Harrison's psychological state and issued a ruling that was a compromise between the prosecution's and defense's positions. Harrison was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge stated, "Your actions were deliberate, but the circumstances that led to this require special consideration. This sentence reflects the gravity of the crime committed, but also takes into account your psychological state." The sentence drew mixed reactions in society. Many believed Harrison deserved a harsher punishment, especially considering the brutality of the crime. Others, on the contrary, sympathized with him and claimed he became a victim of circumstances that drove him to desperation. Local residents and Richard's colleagues were divided in their opinions. Some defended his reputation, remembering his professional achievements and contributions to the community. However, revelations about his secret life changed the perception of even his most devoted friends.